Hey everybody, this week I have a little bit of a disclaimer. Normally the Frog Questions podcast we try to have very clean language, or at least I censor the bad words, but this week our episode is actually about bad words or curse words specifically, so there may be, but definitely will, be some words in this episode that will not be censored out that may be highly offensive to people. So just use your discretion as you're listening to this episode. Obviously, I am not going to leave in any words that are unnecessarily profane or vulgar, but just the nature of the topic means that in order to discuss bad words, we have to maybe explicitly use some bad words. So listen at your own discretion.
Welcome to Frog Question Friday.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast where we read and discuss questions submitted by you all about life, the universe, or anything else that might come up. My name is Ben Mursky, and this is Frog Question Friday. This week, our question that was submitted through the website by someone named Camille is as follows. Like any normal teenager, I sometimes use curse words. My parents call them bad words, but I don't think that it's offending them in any way, and freedom of speech, right? Is cursing considered sinning? And sin is a very particular word that's used usually in a religious context, and depending on the culture or the religion that you're in, some people may use the word sin and some people may not. So to address whether or not it's a sin, what we're really asking is there anything immoral or intrinsically evil or wrong about using a particular word? Now the words swearing, cursing, profanity, bad words, these all refer to words that society has marked as taboo or that you are not supposed to use. What's interesting about swearing or cursing or bad words or whatever you want to call them is that all cultures, all time periods have... Swearing, cursing, profanity, bad words, all of these expressions refer to words or phrases that society or the group of people that you live with has marked as taboo, like you're not supposed to use them or they're bad in some way. What's interesting about swear words or curse words is that all cultures, every culture, every time period, and even every language that we know about has actually done this. They've set aside words and said you're not allowed to use them, they're bad. You can kind of break down swearing or curse words I've broken them down into basically 4 categories. Depending on who you read, which researcher you read, there are different ways to break up curse words, different ways to categorize them. What I've found just in terms of the words themselves or their usage is that they basically refer to 4 different things, and I'm not an expert here, so you can take issue with my categories if you'd like to, but basically it seems like curse words break down into, number 1, bodily functions. So whether you're referring to pooping or having sex or anything that your body does, like actions that your body does, that's part of its natural purpose, there are words that describe those actions in a more vulgar way. The second group would be insults against family members. These are often considered, depending on the culture, these are often considered to be among the worst words that you can use, the most offensive words you can use, partially probably because they're used, unlike bodily functions, they're used actually to offend people, deliberately to offend people. There's some really interesting and creative words that have been used in different cultures at different times. For instance, in Chinese, in the Chinese language, there is an expression that essentially means "F your ancestors to the 18th generation." The idea here being that ancestry or your ancestors is something that people hold to be very sacred, not just in Chinese culture, but in pretty much every culture. Your ancestors, or the people who have given birth to you, or given birth to the people who have given birth to you, are very sort of sacred or respected in your family. So by cursing them in this way, you are offending somebody in the worst way that you can. There's also a curse word in Norse culture. That was like the Vikings, and they would the phrase they used was to insult somebody is that they would call you a child born of a long dead sow, which is I don't even really understand what that means. But the point is, you're trying to offend the person's lineage and say that like the person's mother or grandparents are somehow bad. So as a way of insulting the person, you actually insult their family. Third category is swearing by a deity. So it's basically profaning the name of God or the gods. There are many examples in many cultures. We don't have to go through them, but any culture you look at that has a religion that is sacred to them, that has a deity that they worship, there will be curse words or profane words, sometimes called oaths, that you will basically disrespect the deity on purpose as a way of cursing. And lastly, the last category is just what I'm calling slurs, which is basically a highly disrespectful word for a group of people. You can classify people by their race, their sex, their sexual orientation, whatever it might be. You're grouping these people together and using a word that is deliberately meant to be offensive to that group of people. And we don't need to use any examples from there. Actually, I probably will use an example of a slur, but in a minute. Basically, just to sum up what these curse words are, is that what's happening is society sets these words aside and they call them bad. They say these are bad words, you don't use them. And the purpose society setting them aside is really so that later on we can break that rule and use them and then feel like we're rule breakers. The words themselves are going to change over time, and some words don't actually even cross between countries that speak the same language. And I'll give you an example of this in just a minute. Between the United Kingdom and the United States, there are words that we were both English-speaking regions, but as what may be a curse word in one country is not a curse word in another country. The only thing we know for sure is that there have always been, and there will always be, as long as there are people, curse words. There's always going to be curse words. There have always been curse words. This is just a practice of human culture that we like to set words aside and say, don't use these words, but then secretly everyone uses them. In fact, statistically speaking, I don't think I have this in my notes, but I was doing some research into curse words. Statistically speaking, it seems like 60 to 70% of a given population curses. Researchers will also say that it seems like men curse more than women, although other researchers will point out that it seems like men curse more openly, like in the public, but they have a theory that maybe women curse more in specific situations or when they're with their friends more than being out in public. So it only seems like men curse more. The point is 60 to 70% of the population that's a huge number. It seems like really the vast majority of people use curse words, despite the fact that society, comprised of leaders from this group of people, have decided that these words are bad. So there's kind of this, it's an interesting thing that's going on here, because we as a group come together and say, these words are bad, don't use them, but then pretty much everyone does. This really is just a discussion of what curse words are, though. And I think the question that I've received from Camille online is asking about morality. She asks directly, is it a sin or is it immoral? Is there something evil about using these words? And we don't really care about legality. Certainly, I think there's a really long discussion we could have about different policies in different countries and how actually some cultures will punish you for using these words. But that's not really what we're interested in. We are interested in the morality of using curse words. Now, the question referenced freedom of speech. Like, doesn't freedom of speech mean I can say whatever I want? First of all, freedom of speech doesn't exactly mean that you can say whatever you want, but it does mean that you have the freedom to express yourself. Freedom of speech means you can say curse words. You are allowed to use curse words. That is part of your freedom of speech within limits. But it doesn't actually answer the question of what is moral, because you have to remember there's a term we have, we talk about this term in religion class, which is legalistic morality, which is this idea that what the law says determines what is right and wrong. Like the law governs right and wrong. And this is actually, it's not just wrong. It's not just incorrect to think this. It's actually really harmful to think this, because if there's one thing history has shown us, it's that the law, society makes mistakes all the time when they come up with laws. In an ideal world, the laws of the government would decide what is right and wrong and truthfully hold to the code of what is right and wrong. But the problem with government is that it sometimes screws up. It sometimes gets things wrong. And then you have laws. There are things that are made illegal that aren't actually morally bad. And there are also things that are legal that are morally bad. So we can't stick to the law to decide or determine what is morally right or wrong. The fundamental question here is the question, does a sound you can make with your mouth carry the weight of morality? Do sounds carry weight? Now, as a brief example, before we answer this question, I'm going to use, I'm about to use a highly offensive word. This is a slur, that is used for, gay men and now women. So avert your ears if you're offended, but there is, the word fag is a highly offensive term for a gay man, and now in recent years it's also been used to apply to gay women. But that word in this country is highly offensive. Meanwhile, if you say fag in British English, so in Great Britain, for example, that actually means cigarette. Now, this is an example that I think a lot of people have heard. I think it's actually it's a source of humor for some people. I think there's a lot of jokes that center on the fact that this word is a racial slur in one country, and then just on the other side of the ocean, it just means something as simple as a cigarette in another country. But I think what this proves more than anything is that words do not carry intrinsic moral weight. When you use this word, if you're in one country, it doesn't offend anyone and it doesn't mean something bad in this country. If you use it in another country, it's highly offensive to pretty much everybody. I think what this example shows is that words can cause real damage to people, but it does not carry intrinsic moral weight. And what we mean by the word intrinsic is that there's something like actually evil about the word itself, that just using the word itself constitutes evil. We can't make that argument, because if we said that using this word in particular carried intrinsic evil or intrinsic badness, that would mean that every time a British person asked for a cigarette, they would actually be sinning, if you want to use that word, or doing something immoral or doing something bad. And they're not. Well, aside from the fact that smoking is bad, the mere use of the word is not bad. So when it comes to practice, this is the example I like to use, and this is my answer pretty much whenever anyone asks me if curse words are immoral. This is basically the allegory of going over to your grandmother's house. And it sort of presumes that we all have this similar figure in our lives of like a grandmother whose house we go over to. But you can imagine this character. It's an older woman who has a deep appreciation for etiquette and the way that rules should be or used to be. And I think some of us, whether it's our grandmother or not, we can empathize with this idea of being over at somebody's house who cares a lot about etiquette, all the way down to the putting your elbows on the table. You know, don't put your elbows on the table. That's rude. And I think this thinking about putting your elbows on the table is a good way of thinking about curse words, because putting your elbows on a table is not, there's no moral quality to this. When you put your elbow on the table, it's not like you're actually sinning or doing something bad. You're just resting your arm on a table. It's not a big deal. But you have to remember, when you're at your grandmother's house, it's a big deal to her. To her, it matters a lot that you're putting your elbows on the table. So while this may be a standard practice for you at home, while you're over at your grandmother's house, you don't do it, because you know it offends her. And it's better, even though there's nothing actually wrong with it, you know it's better to keep your elbows off the table so that she won't be offended. I think this is a good way to think about curse words. Although we might say there's nothing actually intrinsically wrong with using words that are considered bad or taboo by society, that doesn't mean that they can't really hurt people. So to directly answer the question, no. The answer is no. There is nothing immoral about the words you use. However, we should still be careful how we use our words, because words can offend and hurt people. The trouble is, unless you are by yourself or with maybe a group of very close friends, you never know what words might be offensive to someone within earshot. And that is why words are taboo. That's why maybe in this case, culture has it right. They're fun to say when you're frustrated. They can relieve stress when you stub your toe or make a mistake, but you need to be very careful about when you use them and around whom you use them, because using a curse word is not intrinsically immoral, but it becomes immoral when it hurts the feelings of somebody who hears you say it. And that is something you never know when that's going to happen. So in general, this is why we consider these words taboo. It's kind of silly that curse words even exist, because they only exist because we as a culture decide to make them exist. But the fact that they exist is, it's a part of our culture, and maybe an important part of our culture. So no, they're not immoral, but just be careful. So if you'd like to see photos from any of the shows I've recorded this week, I probably won't have any photos from this show. Or if you'd like to stay up to date with Frog Questions or ask a question to prompt the next show, you can follow Frog Questions on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Snapchat. If you have a comment about today's show, if you have a favorite curse word you'd like to share, or if you want to press the issue further or have another question or comment, you can submit a question of your own through frogquestions.com, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Frog Questions wherever you get your podcasts, so that you never miss an episode. For more information or to ask a question of your own, please visit frogquestions.com.